Jake Arthur.
And how old are you?
I'm 3 days away from 49.
And where do you live right now?
Toledo, Ohio.
Toledo.
I'm born and raised. I've been a few other places, but I always come back.
Okay. Is Ohio special to you?
It, yes and no. I mean, it's home. It's what I know.
Okay. How do you self-identify?
I am a FTM leather daddy.
Okay. And can you say exactly what that means?
Female to male, transgender. I firmly believe I'm transgender, not transsexual, and I identify as a leather top daddy.
Okay. And within your leather identification, do you also identify as kinky?
I don't see anything that I do as unusual, not for myself, maybe for somebody else, but yeah. I mean, I suppose sometimes when I'm talking to somebody so they understand, I'll say kinky, but I am just who I am, and I like what I like.
Cool. How old were you when you first found kink?
First found kink as in community or as in about myself?
Oh.
I don't know how old I was. I know I was given my first whip at 14 years old. It was a souvenir. It was a real leather whip, but it was a souvenir from Oklahoma my grandparents brought back.
Okay. And then what about, so did you just experiment with it?
Yeah, pretty much. I was disappointed when I went to Washington, D.C. because, you know, all the boys got to buy handcuffs. Okay, they confiscated them for the ride home, but and that was in 6th grade. But I wasn't allowed to buy handcuffs.
Okay. Why weren't you allowed to buy handcuffs?
Because I wasn't allowed to hang out with the boys. I don't actually even recall where they got them. I did end up buying a tavern pipe at Mount Vernon, and it got left behind, and that was so sad.
So then, if you found kind of your first, you found your whip at 14, had you already been thinking about kinky things, or?
When I sit down and think about it now, because I don't have a lot of childhood memories, I do have a lot of remembrances of childhood dreams, and I know now, I think before I knew, I wasn't, it was just, there was a dream that I remember from when I was a kid, and in the end, it's a woman with a ball gag, a big bright red ball gag, and her face is also bright red. And I think it's from looking at a bondage magazine somebody left laying around, but the name Lorelei was in my dream, and that I couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 years old. And like I said, I now know because I have a lens to look at it through, but for the longest time I did not know.
So when did you actually start to dabble then?
Probably not until I was, 18, 19 years old. I mean, actively. I eventually did acquire handcuffs, leg irons before I was out of high school, and began experiment with making stuff, but I really never had anybody to play with until I was about 18 years old.
What was your motivation between that, just out of curiosity? Or to get the implements before you even started playing?
I just liked them.
Really?
Yeah.
Cool. So then, when was your first what was your first kinky experience like with somebody, or play experience like? And how old were you?
Well, it would have probably been my first girlfriend, because I remember, well, no, that's not exactly true. As a kid, now that you said that, it hasn't even crossed my mind until now. But I mean, we used to play Frankenstein monster and stuff like that, and we would tie each other to trees and things like that. But my first conscious that's kinky was probably with my first girlfriend, and I think, now that I think about it, I mean, I can vaguely see the picture in her head. She had a bone choker on. I'm sure it was a Cowboys and Indians type thing, and I tied her kneeling on the bed with her hands behind her back. I don't remember more details of it than that.
Or how you got to that place?
Yeah.
Just organic?
Yeah. Like I said, it's just part of who I am. Yeah. It's not necessarily something I've ever really thought about.
Right. Did you ever have that moment of clarity though, that like, I'm not just experimenting? This.
Yeah, actually, I mean, I don't exactly know when it was, but I do know, like I said, I fully believe I'm transgender, not transsexual. I don't need any operations to be who I am. I am who I am regardless. And but had I been forced to choose between the two, I would have chosen leather over gender. I could have lived. I mean, I lived 30 years as a butch woman. I could have lived 30 more as a butch woman. But you know, by then, if you take my kink away from me, no, I'm going to be completely miserable.
And for you, has there ever been a difference in your mind between kinky and leather?
There, yeah, always. My first entry was through BDSM. I was approached once in we were in the drag bar in Toledo, and the leather bar is around the corner, and I knew a little bit about leather clubs. I knew, you know, that they were like motorcycle clubs, that they were fraternal organizations, and there I was involved with a woman and a man at the time, and the pledge master of Trident Toledo approached me, and at the time, because of the relationship I was in, I didn't know that much. I didn't know what it meant to pledge. You know, all you had in your head was pictures of Animal House and things like that. And some clubs did do that, even at that time period, because that would have been early 90s. And so I never pursued it, partially because he said, your boyfriend, probably your girlfriend, no way. And we didn't do anything that we didn't do together, because she was extremely abusive, and if it wasn't for him, I'd have probably broken up with her several years before I did. But
your experience back then, because you said at the time you kind of entered when you were more butch identifying, how did leather treat you back then as a butch leatherfolk?
Toledo at the time had 3 leather bars, I think, even before I started going in them. At one time, for the size of town Toledo is, we had an inordinate number of gay and leather bars. But nobody, to me, like I said, maybe I'm just oblivious, but since I grew up being bullied so badly, pardon me, since I grew up being bullied so badly, I learned to ignore it. Fuck you, I'm going to do what I'm going to do anyway. And so I don't know that I was ever treated badly. The many years down the line, when at least one of the bars in Toledo had closed, the sad thing was I've been treated worse as a leatherfolk as a leatherman in a gay space than I was ever treated as a woman in a leather space. Dale and I, my friend Dale, one of the co-founders of loup-garou, and I we were in Toledo. He was an over-the-road trucker, and we were in Toledo, and I'm like, hey, let's go down to Hooterville, and he put on leather shorts. I think I had my chaps on, and we went down there, and Hooterville was always, when I was growing up, through the time they closed, Hooterville was always considered a leather bar. And we walk in, and in casual leathers, not even formal leathers, and we got the dirtiest looks, like we were in the wrong place. And that was probably one of the last times I was ever in Hooterville, because I'm like, fuck this.
Wow.
But
what kind of, was anybody blatant with you, or was it just...
No, it was dirty looks. Excuse me.
The beauty of being outdoors.
Yeah.
So then what was the aha moment for you that you realized that, you know what, I'm leather?
I don't know, because it's always been there. Because it's more of who I am, whereas most kinky people I know, BDSM people I know, it's what I do. But this is who I am. There is, like I said about transition, there is no me without it. And in Pittsburgh, I transitioned in Pittsburgh, and I didn't have a car, and I only really had access to the groups I could get to via bus and stuff like that, and it was all pansexual BDSM groups. And whereas I had a lot of stuff in common, and I had a lot of friends, I did have one guy, because he didn't understand it. He said, so where does the scene start and where does it end for you? How do you signify this? And I'm like, doesn't. This is who I am. This is how I live. And he couldn't understand that any more than I could understand what he was asking me. That may have been pretty close to an aha moment, but like I said, it just is who I am, and I don't know how to separate it.
Um, so then you mentioned about you located community through taking the bus. Is that what you're saying?
Oh, yeah, in Pittsburgh, actually, the first couple munches I went to, and I had actually been involved in college. There was the first ever BDSM group got founded in Toledo, and the founder happened to run in a similar circle to me, and that was interesting. I never went to any of their first meetings. I knew they were there, but it just wasn't something I was interested in at the time. I was much more involved in founding the first gay pride. Worked with the guy that did the first gay pride in Toledo and the Gay and Lesbian Student Union and stuff like that. I mean, it was something I was interested in, but then it was still sort of background at that time and not forefront. I went through a breakup with my boyfriend and girlfriend, and I moved around a couple times after that, and ultimately landed in Pittsburgh. I started exploring online. I remember when gay.com was a chat site, and for the longest time I was the resident kink and leather expert. I was Daddy Jake. I was the original Daddy Jake there, and once in a while I run into some women that were on the site, and yeah, that was me, and they're like, oh. But in Pittsburgh, the only community I could find, because I did make it to one of the Three Rivers Leather Club meetings. That was when they were actually experiencing their decline that they've now bounced back from some. But the buses out by the Eagle stopped running at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, so anything later than that, yeah, probably not going to happen for me. And what I found interesting was that there was such a divide, because here there are 3 munches in the Pittsburgh area, 2 that I can get to either walking or by bus, and I'm going and I'm talking to these guys, and they're having trouble recruiting members, and yet none of them even knew what a munch was. So I'm like, because I would think I was going, they invited me to a play party that night. They wanted to put an app. I was just going to check them out, because I had already, like I said, been approached by Trident once, and here I go to this the Three Rivers Leather Club meeting just to check them out, and they were trying to put an application in my hand already. And there was a play party that night. Now, I don't think any of them knew I was trans, and I actually had a munch to go to that night, and somebody gave me a lift, but I just found it odd that this group could be in town and be operating. These groups could be in town and operating and not be aware of each other's existence.
So then the leather and the BDSM communities were very divided.
Yes. Yeah. What time? Like I said, that would have been the later '90s, and they were still really divided then. That was one of the things when Trident was more active in Toledo, and second incarnation of Toledo Power and Trust that I got a little more involved in. I tried several times to get the 2 groups to interact, and it just didn't fly, because the BDSM folk had a very different take. I mean, when I was brought up in leather, it's the bars, the bar nights, and the BDSM folk, especially, in relation to some of the big bust that went down in Pennsylvania in the late 80s with the BDSM house party. I can't even remember the year or the name, but there was a lawyer that came to speak to one of the munch groups when I was there that had been involved with that. And actually that is why he became a lawyer, is because of the way they railroaded these folks. And all the BDSM folks, and still even sometimes to this day, they're all anti-bar, anti-alcohol, anti-bar, and it's just not what I'm used to. Because, like I said, I spent more time hanging out. And I think that a lot of that has to do with queer, because before, all the community centers and the picnics and the coffees, that's what we had as a social outlet, was the bars. So to me, bars being an outlet for leatherfolk was perfectly normal, because that's what the outlet was anyway when I was growing up.
Interesting. So you've already kind of started telling me a little bit about it. Actually, I'm gonna finish the thought that you have here. How I know that you now live in Ohio. Have you seen the community change between when you first located Leather?
In Ohio, specifically, Ohio is a microcosm. All the leather bars in Toledo are closed. Most of the gay bars in Toledo are closed. Um, the guys that just took over the Ripcord, which had been the third leather bar to open in Toledo back in the late 80s, early 90s. There was a guy that was trying to buy it from the second owner, and he ended up he was trying to create a bar in the back because it's divided into three parts. He was trying to create specifically leather environment in the back. And I was assured by he defaulted, he couldn't buy it. I was assured by the guys that bought the bar, no, the Pigpen's going to stay a leather bar. So last year at Toledo Pride, Miles and I put on our leathers and went downtown for the party. And so we're like, well, hell, we're down here, let's stop at the bar. And like I said, I had been assured the Pigpen was going to stay a leather bar. And we walk in through the front bar, open the door to step out into the Pigpen, and it's a tiki bar. Yeah, no, I don't think we even stepped into the bar. We turned around and left. Because that was after telling me, yes, it's going to stay a leather bar. Not even a tiki bar. A tiki bar. I was floored. And at the time, they still had friendship colors that we had given to the bar. And finally, this past Claw, we're like, we need the colors back for Claw. And yeah, no, since we have no relationship with them, nor reason to have a relationship with them, yeah, the colors aren't going back.
So where are you all finding community or finding gathering spaces at this time?
In Toledo,
Yeah.
I've tried. So there is a new munch. Well, new it being a relative term. They've been around for several years, and it is some of the folks that have been involved on and off the whole time I've been around. But they're very insular, and I've tried to get involved, and I'm not welcome. So we tried. Tim, the one that was trying to buy the bar, gave us space on Sunday nights in the drag bar to throw parties, and I could not, no matter how hard I tried, could not get people from this munch to it. Oh, here we go. You guys say we need closer parties. I'm throwing a party. I'm dragging equipment down here, and we're only charging $10 to get in, and you're telling me, oh, but it's on Sunday night. Oh, but it's too expensive. Oh, but I don't want to give the bar my money. And I'm like, okay, yeah. So then when the bar changed hands and we kept having trouble, I'm like, forget it. It's not worth it. People aren't coming anyway.
So then there's not much at this time?
No, not as far as not for me. For other people, yes, but not for me.
Are there private parties or anything like that going on?
Well, the munch throws a party at a house occasionally, but like I said, I personally have never felt welcome. And we tried to build bridges. We threw a kinky carnival and invited every group in the area in downriver Detroit and Cleveland to host booths, and the Toledo group wouldn't do it at all. The bar owner got one of the young men's support groups through another booth, and we knew a man who was a puppy title holder, and he hosted a booth. But I couldn't even get people that say, we're friends, we're brothers, like Icon Detroit and a couple of the other clubs. Oh, Beautiful from Detroit did come down too. But I tried to give people enough notice, but the Ohio Boys of Leather wouldn't contact us back. And I understand, clubs are getting smaller and smaller, and there are less and less people to go around. But Christ, okay, then instead of ignoring me, tell me, no, we can't make it. But people focus so hard on their own group that they don't seem to realize that there's strength in numbers, and we do better to support everybody in our community rather than say, oh, I don't have time for that. Because the more we don't have time for it, the more there isn't going to be it anymore.
And do you feel that is a new cultural shift, or is that something you have consistently seen?
No, I had the same thing when I was working with student groups when I was in college and everything. Everybody thinks there's, at least in Toledo and Northwest Ohio, there's a lot of apathy. Oh, somebody else will do it. Somebody else will take care of it. I'll go if I feel like it, and I get a little of that. I get a little of that with camp out too. But this is what I've been starting to tell people is, yes, we hope to do this again next year, but we operate and since we operate on a shoestring, every year is our last year. So when you tell me next year, there may never be another year. So far, we've been lucky, and I hope to continue to be lucky, but I can't guarantee you there's ever going to be another year if I'm carrying it all on my back alone. And I know the same from talking to other organizers in bigger events. There really is. People don't. You like to come and you like to party, but when you ask people to step up, they're like, oh, I don't have time.
Yeah, I understand that. So it sounds like you've kind of had a lifetime of either activism or giving to the community in some way, service to the community in some way.
I was raised by hippies. Somewhere around, and I wish I had a copy of it. There is a picture of my mother in a muumuu and my dad in a Nehru jacket, and I remember them hiding illegal aliens. I remember them. My dad was a big union organizer. I remember in a lot. I aced my government class in school, partially because my dad was a union organizer. My dad was the first male Toastmistress in Toledo. He was a member of Toastmistresses International. Nobody ever went hungry around my mother. That's just the way I was brought up. And yeah, all my life. I remember my senior year in high school, they talked about taking out the senior bench because it was an eyesore. We talked about starting an underground paper because they were going to do that.
Wow. So what kind of community organizing or kind of service work have you done previous to this?
loup-garou is going on a little more than 10 years now, because Ethan and I started talking about it a year at least or more before we actually pulled it off. But yeah, like I said, I've been involved with the Munches in Pittsburgh. I was in high school. In high school we seriously did talk about starting an underground paper. After high school, I worked grunt jobs and got my own place and the whole nine. But even before, there was much gay merchandise, I went out, I got a piece of pink felt, and I made myself a pink triangle and sewed it on the back of a denim vest. And that would have been probably about 1986 or 7. So,
You're in teens at that age then, yeah.
Yeah, I would have been 19, 20 years old.
Were you part of any, and also did your schools have any sort of LGBT?
No schools had anything like that then, none at all. But like I said, I wasn't content to sit on my hands. I remember, I was a non-traditional student in college, and I took a class, upper level. One of my first upper level sociology classes was called Social Movements, and the 3 main movements it focused on were welfare rights, women's rights, and welfare rights, women's rights, and civil rights. And me personally, I always thought I didn't know that much about any of those. I knew more than most of the people coming in, plus pagan religious rights and gay and lesbian rights than most of these people that are sitting there telling me, I'm going to do this when I get my degree. And I'm looking at them and I'm thinking, I've been doing that for years. You don't need the piece of paper to do it. Get off your ass and do it. But
so this is just normal. This is just
it's just life for me.
And I would like to just put on record that your mother is here today,
yes,
helping out at Camp Out Weekend. She still goes strong with her record, yes. So did you ever get involved? This is I don't know if you consider an LGBTQ event, or is it? I know it's a kinky and leather event.
It's the And when we were looking for a description, Trey and I were trying to write some stuff up the other day, and she didn't want to make too broad a generalization, but the truth of the matter is this is the only leather trans masculine focused event that I know of in the world. I would love to be proven wrong, but this is the only one I know of. And our original goal when we started it was as a way to bring both trans masculine people and leather folk together. We haven't been particularly successful with that because we're not the cool kids. We're not the place to see and be seen. But we still have given a lot of trans guys a leg up to get into their own communities, which makes me happy.
Good. Were you involved in any other LGBTQ or leather organizations prior to founding loup-garou?
Actually, we had attempted to found, before I transitioned, we had attempted to found a group for women and well, was it before I transitioned at all? I don't even remember. That was fuzzy, and I don't remember. I'm sure I have bylaws around. We worked on founding a group called Pittsburgh Leather and Steel. And I think I may not have been identifying as transgender at that time. Or maybe I, misconstrued, as so many people, even trans folk do, transgender and transsexual. But I do know there was a few women that attended the first one, and the only ones that really stuck it out much were me and another trans woman. No, and the woman I was dating. Or I wasn't dating her at the time, but I eventually dated her. But we tried that. That didn't go anywhere. I actually started a pagan student group in college. I was heavily involved with reviving the Gay and Lesbian Student Union in college. I had tried to get involved with the local lesbian group that hosted coffees and dances and things, but that was before the Butch Femme revival, and I was, as a butch woman, I was extremely unwelcome. I was much more butch as a woman than I am now. Now I'm just me. I don't have anything to prove. Then, I was different.
Right.
And that one was extremely disappointing. I mean, we had gone to a bunch of their stuff. We had tried to get involved. We went to the coffees. We went to the dances. They were running out of places to host the coffees, so we volunteered to host the coffee. We couldn't afford a phone at the time, and that was before cell phones. And the month before at the coffee, because the coffees were held in private homes, the month before they're turning people away because it was too crowded, and not a single person showed up the month my girlfriend and I hosted. So.
And were you in a butch femme dynamic?
No, we were both butch.
Okay. Which was always
a bad thing. It wasn't as bad as it was when butch femme, in the 40s and 50s.
Exactly.
It wasn't that bad, but no, my boy that helped found loup-garou went through the same thing. He's about 10 years older than I am, and he remembers living as a butch woman and having women in the groups he was getting involved with saying, "You don't have to be like that." Because butch was still a bad word then.
And this is the 80s and 90s that we're talking about?
Yeah. He probably early 80s for him.
Right.
And
Wow.
yeah.
Well, we're kind of starting on this path, so I'm going to just ask you, I wanted, if you could just tell me a bit about your personal journey and evolution, and overall, how you've already kind of started talking about how you began it. When did you start feeling the inclination to be more butch identified?
It just always was who I was. I mean, when I was little, I was a tomboy, and I never changed. And again, it's just me.
And your parents were, it sounds like,
at least fairly supportive. If they weren't, I ignored it. They never did force me to wear dresses. They never forced me to change the way I dress or what I did or what games I played.
And did you end up having other friends who were also butch identified or anything? Or?
Well, like you said, butch wasn't an identity exactly then. Butch was a bad thing then. Butch was always what I was most attracted to too, also. But yet at the same time, it wasn't as bad as it was during the 40s and 50s where, two butches never even looked at each other. But it was still kind of, well, to be butch at all, people looked at you cross-eyed, and then to be a butch interested in butches, they looked at you even more cross-eyed.
How did people respond to you back when you were younger and butch presenting?
I don't know. I don't know how to answer that question because, like I said, I grew up being teased and bullied, so I learned to ignore it. So if somebody was unpleasant, if that's the reason they were unpleasant, I have no idea because I really didn't give a shit.
And then through your evolution, when did you start just making some determinations that butch identity wasn't exactly accurate for who you feel you are?
I don't know. Again, I have no clue. I do know I started exploring gender issues through leather, through BDSM with gender bending and things like that. But I do remember, because I was involved with a community group in Toledo that was trying to bring all the different groups together to do bigger things. And I remember, I would know the guy's name if somebody told me, but I can still see his face clearly because he was the one that ended up killing the Rainbow Community Coalition in Toledo altogether in the end, because the first time I remember him being such a pain in the ass was there was a support group for trans women, and they sent a representative, and she did not come dressed. She came as a man and excused herself to the restroom to change. And this man said, "What do we need? Why do they need to be included? They're just a bunch of drag queens getting together to bitch." And I'm like, I was offended by that then, and that was before I ever started exploring my own gender issues. Because, like I said, I firmly believe the more of us that get together, the better off we are. And I always have, which is why when they talked about this Rainbow Community Coalition, I was so all for it. In the end, this is the same gentleman that ended up squashing it to death because we were meeting, one of the bar owners had been busted for child pornography, and we were meeting, and the woman from the Lavender Triangle apparently was of Jewish descent, and this man sits there before the meeting even really got underway, and he's like, "We need to take up a collection and hire a high-priced shyster lawyer for Greg because he's done so much for the community." And like I said, I didn't know at the time that she had been of Jewish extraction, and she lit into him, ripped him up one side and down the other, and that was the last meeting of the Rainbow Community Coalition ever in Toledo. So
So then that sounds like it sparked a thought in your mind about...
I've always been in support of transgender and transsexual inclusion, even before I even considered it for me.
When did you make decisions about having male and masculine identified pronouns then?
That I can't even remember that. I mean, it's just who I am, and I'm not good with dates, and I have memory issues because of things that have happened in my past. So, once it's gone, once it's past, it's past.
But it sounds like in some ways it was almost an organic.
Yeah, it was. It was much more organic. But even after I started considering it for myself, I always hated the greeting because it happens again with the younger guys. I still see them doing it sometimes, but the greeting was, "When do you start T?" And even after I had decided I was going on hormones, when people would ask me that question, I would say, I don't need it to be who I am. I am who I am regardless.
They would just ask you that.
Oh, it was like a greeting. It was so common.
Was it a greeting among trans men?
Yes. Okay. And as a term of support or a term of joining the club? Yeah, I don't know. That's, like I said, it bothered me anyway. That's why I'm like, I am who I am regardless.